All right, guys, welcome. It's Miss Moore White, and I'm back with the last video for chapter 14. So I think we're gonna start like slide 30 somebody, I don't know. We're just gonna go on and get directly into it. Did I close out that PowerPoint? Well, there it is. I surely did not. Here it comes, guys. All right, so let's go on. I think the last one that we stopped on was slide number 30, the reach of enlightenment in Europe. So we're going to start with 31 and we're going to go all the way down to 44. So it shouldn't be too long of a video. We should be able to knock this out hopefully in about 20, 25 minutes, less than 30 for sure. So popular culture and the Enlightenment. So popular culture, okay? So what is popular, okay? So many popular works tend to be sensationalist or pornographic or vulgar, but they also revealed how low culture enlightenment attempts to mock and defy traditional institutions like the clergy and the monarchy. So basically, we're seeing finally this popular culture that actually has the power and the presence to actually, you know, take shots at the ruling or traditional authorities, whereas in previous times you couldn't take shots at the church or the monarchy because they would just like kill you. All right. The reading public generated new cultural institutions. So in Britain and German, we have book clubs and coffee houses for aristocrats and wealthy common men would come together to read and engage in these discussions. So these are going to be super important to European society. Parisian salons were social and political spaces for aristocratic women to preside and dominate. So yes, a salon where you got your hair done, your makeup done, your pedicures, all those things, that is going to be a place for rich, wealthy European women to, preside and talk their politics. So we're finally seeing women are included in politics, even though it's off to the side talking with their homegirls, they're still able to actually discuss these things. And so also as the number of female or women readers and writers increased, we're going to see that they're going to have to start specifying and actually increasing or creating a lane for these women to actually have their own area, their own journals and things like that. Kind of reminiscent of what's happening in China a few hundred years back, where women of a certain educational status were able to create books or be authors or kind of run smaller institutions. So kind of a similarity happening in China and later on happening in Western Europe as well. So Enlightenment thinkers, challenges to authority and tradition. So we see this shift where before it was, you couldn't really explain everything. So you would just kind of have a story to it or assign a biblical a verse or some kind of something to it. But now we have more access to what's the word I'm looking for? We have more access to being able to read, literacy. Thank you. More access to literacy. And through that literacy, we're able to have more people who are educated and then also more people who are going to kind of go against some of those traditions and those norms that have been in place for a while. So although many Enlightenment thinkers were sponsored by the aristocracy, they emphasize merit over birth. So that work that you put in over where you were born. So they're being sponsored by the people that were birth over merit. They were born into really wealthy families or really high-ranking families and are able to control society because of that. But they're sponsoring or paying the patronage of these Enlightenment thinkers, these philosophers that are saying, yo, I don't care where you were born. If you don't put in the work, you should not be there. So John Locke, we have the mind, a clean state, the tabula rasa, all ideas acquired through experience and cultural differences result of unequal opportunity. So basically, how do I say this? So you get your experiences and that's how you get your culture. That's how you get your ideas, all of those things. And when he looks at the other races, like, the white races here, Africans will be down here and kind of everybody else will be in between those two places. But when he looks at Africans, said the reason why they are less than or lower than is because they've had unequal opportunities and not because of colonization and theft. But moving on. All right, then we have Adam Smith. Adam Smith argued that a philosopher and a street porter were born with the same ability to reason and both should be free to rise in society. So he's trying to really get people to step outside of the caste system that's been so prevalent since human interaction, pretty much, okay? So basically it says no matter where you were born, you should have the ability and the skills to be able to rise up to the next level. So both Locke and Smith are going to argue that a mixed set of social and political institutions are necessary to regulate relationships among human beings and create more equity and more fairness. But both of these men did not think that women should be included in the conversation because they unfortunately were not rational enough thinkers, nor were they independent enough thinkers. So despite the protests from educated women like Mary Wollstonecraft and Olympia de Gauche, those are some documents from, or at least from Mary Wollstonecraft, that you all should have had gotten access to probably about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. So even with these really educated, really smart women who ended up being really famous in world history, we're still going to see that the Enlightenment is still not going to change the subordinated or the status of putting women beneath everyone else. Universal laws and religious tolerance. So moving on, we're making good time, slide number 3 is already right here. So Enlightenment philosophers, universal laws and religious tolerance. So Enlightenment philosophers sought to discover the laws of human behavior. So once again, before we get this humanist kind of viewpoint, we are looking outside and looking in the stars and looking in the clouds and looking to the gods. But now we're going to look to the human and the person that we see and discuss those things. So we have Adam Smith, the Wealth of Nations, describing the universal economic laws. So he argued that a free market provided the best conditions for producing wealth. So we live in what we consider a free market economy or a capitalistic economy. So that means as much money as you're able to, as many supplies as you're able to get and then sell those supplies, you're then able to make as much money as you can make during that time period. That is a free market economy. And he also believed there was going to be this invisible hand that was going to correct all the negatives and all the ills that were happening in the economy. Still waiting on an invisible hand. So Smith believed that poorer nations needed to abide by nature's laws and behave virtuously before this will be true for them. So virtuously. So what he's trying to say to these poor countries, you're not Christian, you're not white. And that is your downfall. And so until you become Christian, until you are able to lighten your population through sexual abuse, essentially, and rape and or what they would call intermarrying, your country or your people are going to stay below. And once again, that's completely ignoring the exploitive behavior that Western European nations are doing in both Africa, the Americas, and as well as Southeastern Asia or Eastern Asia as well. Anyway, so, but even with all that, the Enlightenment thinkers are going to urge religious tolerance. Okay. So they believe that reason, not force, was the best way to create a community of believers and of morally good people. But in general, they're really going to respect you more if you are Christian. And if you are not, they're going to find ways to disregard your opinions. Okay. So even with that, though, we're going to see governments are going to censor books or exile writers who criticize the church. So once again, we want to be tolerant, but if you are not Christian, we are not listening to you, and we are also going to kind of make your life difficult. So you see the hypocritical nature of Enlightenment thinking. Like, everyone has these powers except women. We are all religiously tolerant as long as you're Christian. Like all of these things, these hypocritical views are coming back or coming around. So universal knowledge and radical thought. So seeking universal knowledge. So knowledge that's going to be around everywhere in the universe, okay? So most Enlightenment thinkers sought to discover universal knowledge. So the most important product of the Enlightenment was the French Encyclopedia, okay? That's going to include 28 volumes of essays by nearly 200 intellectuals. It's going to be that first kind of real collaborative effort to bring in really educated people and their work around the world with the encyclopedia. So we know that term encyclopedia now is like a universal knowledge. When I was a kid, I had a set of encyclopedias. We have Wikipedia, which is like the ultimate encyclopedia that gives you information for literally everything. Okay, so encyclopedias are incredibly important through our world history, and they started in France. All right, and then we have the Arabs are going to be praised for preserving Greek and Roman science. Okay, so we could even say that Greek and Roman science was stolen or taken from North Africa, from the Egypt River, the Nile River Valley region, and then it was brought into Greek and Roman times, and then it was preserved by the Arabs. So we see that is going to be really, really important as well. So preserving these sciences that have already been passed down for centuries up until this point. Okay, and so once again, as I said previously, if you ain't Christian, they don't want to hear anything from you. So Islam is still going to be portrayed as a faith with ill will, even though Islam and Christianity are pretty synonymous. Even the people that are in the books, the Quran and the Bible, are pretty synonymous. The messenger angel Gabriel is in with the Bible and the Quran, and even Allah just means God in Arabic. Okay, so enlightenment and the origins of radical thought. Enlightenment thinkers sought objective, rational ways to classify people and cultures. So objective. So how can I link you guys together? How can I find a way to accurately classify different people? So we have Francois Bernier, who is going to be the first one to classify people across the world. By classify, I think you know what I'm talking about. He's gonna turn them into races. Okay, so we got race 1, race 2. Okay, move on. Okay, so then we have Carolus Linnaeus, who's gonna introduce the 5 subspecies of the Homo sapien. And I can guarantee you, Europeans are on top and the Africans are on bottom, and everybody who's not European is gonna be above the African, somewhere in between there. Check it out yourselves, okay? So, and we're gonna see they're gonna categorize it based on your European upbringing. So the lighter your skin or the smaller your features, the higher you're going to be to the top of that caste system or that list. So ideas of liberty spread far and wide, but Enlightenment men didn't intend for them to be applied universally because they didn't think that women should be, given these rights. And then if we add in the fact that these people across that they're conquering a little bit darker than them, they also don't want to include them in these Enlightenment ideas either. And we'll see these this idea coming to a head later on, when you are literally talking about, we are the country that supports justice and freedom for all and everything, but you are enslaved. Okay. All right, anyway, so some justify European expansion overseas and a new kind of racism. So even though we have this Enlightenment thinker saying that everyone is equal and it's supposed to be fair and everyone should have a free shot and a free chance and a porter and a king are the same thing and da-da-da-da-da-da, yeah, no. They're still going to support people going overseas, conquering these quote unquote less developed nations or people, and really just being incredibly vicious and brutal and racist to them. All right, so now our hybridized cultures in the Americas. So the brutalization, we like to, I won't say we, because I'm not the we, but the historians in general will classify, they like to romanticize what's happened throughout history. Ooh, creating hybrid cultures. I want to call a spade a spade. They're basically talking about sexual assault that was permissible and allowed during this time period under the justification to build a better person in the area, one that was a mixture of native blood and European blood, who wasn't quite European, but wasn't quite native. So they were somewhere in between those two. But anyway, so in the 17th and 18th centuries, so 16 and 1700s, the mingling of European colonizers, native people, and African slaves produced new hybrid cultures, okay? So a lot of different names for these people were gonna come up with: mulatto, mestizo, and that, like, drawing a blank on the other ones, but those are the two that are going to be most prevalent and popular: mulatto and mestizo. So increasingly, this new mixture grew unbalanced as Europeans imposed their authority over America. So it's weird, right? So we have these new cultures. So the Europeans want to Christianize, they want to civilize these Amerindians and the Africans that are in the Americas. They want to civilize these people, right? Done. Okay, so they're getting rid of their religion. They're going to get rid of their tribal religion and make them take on Christianity. So while they're able to take on Christianity, we see that word that's going to come up: syncretism. We see a syncretism happening between African and Native American and Christian beliefs. So as I said previously in class that I've done, when you're going to a European American church, they can be kind of quiet, kind of dry, not really full of music, full of life, versus if you go to a Black or a brown church, you're gonna hear screaming and everything else that's gonna happen in there. And that is that syncretism of our culture. So you can take away our religion, but you can never take away our culture and our spirits. And that is something that has been prevalent throughout our religious experience in America. All right, and so, all right, so with that being said, so we see that the Africans and the Amerindians are going to be forced to borrow or take on this ownership of culture that they didn't necessarily want. But we're going to see on a smaller scale that the Europeans are also going to take some things or borrow some things from the Africans and the Amerindians, but it's not going to be an equal trade. So we'd say that the Europeans definitely took away a lot more of the culture of African and Native American peoples, and then they received back a smaller amount of culture than they wiped away from those two populations. So elites in Latin America and North America increasingly followed the taste and fashions of European aristocrats. So once again, even though you have these European by blood who have been in the Americas for that, they're European by blood, but they have been in the Americas or been in Africa or Latin America, excuse me, for a while, for generations now. They're still looking back to their homeland and saying, how do they dress? What do they like? What do they need? I want those exact same things for myself, even though I'm not in Europe anymore, I'm in the New World. So we're going to see that the New World is going to make those elites still want to live like they were living in Europe. All right, so Christianizing and civilizing, okay? These two go hand in hand. So spiritual encounters. So Christian missionaries were backed by armies and officials, but forced conversions were rarely a complete success. So they want people to join Christianity willingly, but that is not typically what happens. So they're going to force people, and when they force, they're going to see, as I said previously, it's not going to be completely successful. So missionaries are going to be one of our first keys about using a variety of conversion methods. So missionaries, okay, so we live in California. In California, there are a bunch of missions up and down the coast. Honestly, there are missions that go from Canada all the way into Mexico, and we can go even further down in South America as well. But these missions were these, factories for Christianity, and they were not nice places. They were brutal places. They were evil places. And so what you would see are, as these Europeans, Christians are coming into the New World and interacting with all the Native Americans, we see that they're going to go about changing their religions pretty viciously. They're going to smash their gods, smash their idols. They're going to whip the people who do not convert. And they're going to also knock down temples. Not the best way to get buy-in. If we look at what a lot of Islamic groups have done, Islam is now known about tolerance around the same time period. They're not vicious. They're not brutal like that. You pay a tax, you can be whatever you want to do and not have to die. Or in certain places, they're not even going to tax you. You can just practice your own religion. But we see with Christianity, if you're not Christian, it is never, ever, ever okay. All right, so with that, so we're going to see that the missionaries are also going to learn Native American culture and use that knowledge to promote Christianity. So they're going to take a Native American idol or a god, and they're going to say, yo, this is similar to this story over here, okay? Your story right here lines up directly with, the Psalms or with Job or with whoever else might be in the Bible. And they're going to be like, yo, it's the same. You should be Christian, see? All right, and so Christian conversions are often brought hybrid forms that incorporated indigenous gods and traditions. So one place that we can see that kind of really prevalent or really heavily in our society or in our American society, if you look at like what's happening in Haiti, for instance, Haitian Christianity is definitely a mixture of some of their traditional or indigenous gods along with Christianity coming together. So some of the saints that are praised in that form of Christianity are going to be ones that are indigenous and things like that. Okay, so Europeans also tended to Christianize African slaves with similarly mixed results. So similar things are going to happen. Okay, so the Amerindians are, so once again, similar results as in Africa. You go to a Black church, it's a Black church by the singing, the dancing, the screaming, the whatever it is. So that's going to be that African culture that never was knocked away, and it's still very prevalent. So let's move on. So Amerindians are going to have success assimilating Europeans. Okay, so by like that sounds like what it says. So we're going to see that we see a lot of Europeans taking over Amerindian populations, but there are going to be some times where Amerindians are going to take over and bring in Europeans into their folds. So some of them are going to be captured through battles and then forced to join Native American cultures, and some of them are going to voluntarily join the Amerindians because they see that whatever Britain is doing, whatever France is doing, it's not the business. But these Amerindians have been living here for centuries, for thousands of years. They know what they're talking about. So I'd rather align myself with them than align myself with these Europeans that might get me offed. All right, now we have intermarriage and cultural mixing, okay? So initial gender imbalances prompted mixing between Europeans and Amerindians. There were a lot more men from Europe that came into the Americas. So you have a lot of men who are looking for wives or families or whatever. So we're, as I said previously, they're going to call it intermarriage. But you know, sometimes we have to call a spade a spade. It was rape or not really consensual all the time. There are plenty of books like Howard Zinn, A People's History of the United States, that talks about some of the abuses that natives face, things like that. But anyway, so sometimes there was a lot of abuse, but there were some also some times where there was consensual mixing of the two populations. Okay, so the offspring of these mixed ancestries included Spanish mestizos, French mestis, who also outnumbered French settlers. And so it's kind of like, well, what happens? You're not quite European, you're not quite Amerindian fully. So what happens to those populations? So we know that you're not going to be cast as high as a European, but you're not going to be low as an African or low as a Native American because you have mixed blood. Okay, so anyway, sexual interactions between European men and enslaved African women were almost always forced. So our Native American ones, some of those might have been consensual, a lot of them weren't, but when we talk about our African interactions with Europeans, those are most times always going to be the result of rape. Yeah, I think I talked to you guys about doing my own DNA genealogy, and I saw that about 7 and 8 generations ago, there was a insertion of European DNA into my family's bloodline. The only logical thing could be, unfortunately, because of the time period, it had to be during slavery, and it had to have been a non-consensual interaction. So a lot of our family histories are kind of marred by the interactions with Europeans over the last few hundreds of years, and that shows up with our religion choices. It shows up on our skin colors. It shows up with our last names. It shows up with our languages. Like all of those things just show you the pushing away of our culture and the forced taking on of someone else's. All right, so forging American identities. So colonists began to develop distinct American identities. So one of those is going to be the Creole identity. So Creole people are going to be people born in the Americas, but they have privileges. So I'm sorry, put that back. Put this back. So Creoles are going to be born in the Americas, and they're going to resent the privileges that the European borns in Europe actually get from their country or from their home country. The Creole identity is going to gain strength from Enlightenment ideals. We're going to have those reading clubs, those salons, all those things to really discuss Enlightenment ideals. But we know that the Enlightenment ideals are hypocritical. So are these mixed race people going to be accepted as European? Are they going to be accepted as Native American, or are they going to fall somewhere in the middle, that mesti or that mestizo or that mulatto, that middle period? All right, so Spanish Crown is going to attempt to censor and control publications, but they're going to be unsuccessful. So the Spanish Crown, that is what's happening in Spain. And we're talking about books being produced in the New World. So as much as they want to control and stop all those things, they're really going to be unsuccessful because they're not in the same place as the people who are producing these things. All right, Anglicanization. All right, so Anglicanizing someone. So wealthy colonists in British American copied English ways. If I Anglicanize you, that basically means I'm Europeanizing you or Western Europeanizing you. They're going to construct big houses modeled on English country estates, even though they're not going to be in England. They're going to be in the Americas, whatever. They're going to import furnishing and fashions from Britain, even though it may not make sense to dress in those manners or to furnish your homes in those manners because you're in different climates, different areas. They don't care, whatever. They're also going to practice patriarchy after sex ratios become more equal in the 18th century. So before the 18th century, they couldn't be so patriarchal. They had to be accepting of women, but then when the levels balanced out, they were like, go back to your rightful place beneath me. Okay. They're going to consume and produce political pamphlets, scientific treaties, and treatises, I can't pronounce that word, it drives me, but basically ideas and thoughts and compilations and social critiques related to the Enlightenment. And one of the more famous documents that we have from that time period, 1776, is going to be the Declaration of Independence, written by the American founding fathers. That is a quintessential Enlightenment document, and it really does obviously work on freeing Americans. But we know that like Enlightenment ideals, it's hypocritical because we're talking about the Declaration of Independence, but they got slaves. Okay, moving on. So the thing with the Enlightenment ideals is that it's just riddled with hypocrisy, at least for me. Okay. All right, the culture and European culture of Oceania. So Oceania is going to be our area like Australia, New Zealand, those islands off in that area. So European influence had powerful consequences in this region. So after 1770, Europeans increasingly began to explore the South Pacific, Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, and the islands of the Southwest Pacific. So some of those islands are going to maintain their autonomy. There are still some of those islands that are considered untouched and have been kind of left alone. But then we have the big one called Australia. So is it a country or is it a continent or is it, who knows? Anyway, so we're going to see that Australia is going to become Anglicanized. And the way they do it is pretty vicious, pretty rough. And the Aborigine or the indigenous people that live in Australia and New Zealand are the ones that are going to take the brunt or the most of the issues. So until then, Australia had been a world apart like the Americas, separated by water and distance from other colonies. And there had been about 300,000 indigenous hunter-gatherers that lived there at the time of European colonization. And we can see, just like when the Europeans came into the Americas, where you lost between 90 and 95% of the population, I can guarantee you they're also going to have similar losses to their populations as well. So one person that we have that you guys should know about is going to be Captain Cook. Okay, so the scientific voyages of Captain Cook. My face. Okay. All right. So European exploration employed a form of scientific imperialism best exemplified by Cook's voyages. So scientific imperialism. So that means that they're going to replace what's already there with something else that they're going to bring in from their culture that they feel is much better or should be there instead. So we're going to see that he's going to open up the Pacific, Australia, and Australia to European colonizers. And they're going to colonize it. And they're going to abuse people and they're going to kill off people. And there's still a lot of abuses that happen in Australia with the Aboriginal people or the native people that live in Australia. So on his first voyage, his first scientific imperialism, he's going to observe the planet Venus from the southern hemisphere and try to find a claim to the southern continent for Britain. So he's basically trying to go out there for Great Britain and make Australia theirs. He's going to make 2 subsequent voyages to bring more people, more ideas, share the land, all that stuff. And with that, we're going to see many artists and scientists are going to accompany Cook on his voyages, including Carol Linney is the person who was going to do the first sub-classification of the different racial groups. Anyway, so they're going to make, these artists and scientists are going to make about 3,000 drawings of plants, birds, landscapes, and people unknown to European. So we hear about the dude, Charles Darwin's Survival of the Fittest, and how he created basically a book about the plants and animals on the Galapagos Islands, but no one ever talks about the fact that he also was racially classifying people as well. So this is like, you know, a new race, like how can we, a new race to figure out who's better, who's on top. And so essentially goes down to abuse. Anyway, moving on. So here is a map of Southeast Asia. So you guys can see the 3 voyages that Captain Cook took. The blue one is the first route. The red one, or the pinkish red one, is the second route, and the purple one is the third route. So all of these journeys take between, let's see, 3 and 4 years to get completed. And you can see that he is really moving around a lot of Oceania. So he's focusing right here on New Zealand for a while. He's in Australia, and then he's going to go all the way up here and come around through the Pacific Ocean up towards Alaska, and drop on down and then come back around to the Hawaiian Islands and so on and so forth. So he's clearly going to be in a lot of places. Effects of European presence in Oceania. So ecological and cultural effects. So the Aborigines that I was talking about, those native people in Australia, they're going to die in great numbers from the Europeans' imported diseases, or they're going to flee. So just like the Amerindians had no can't think of the word, had no resistance to European diseases. The same thing's going to happen with the Aborigines in Australia because they don't have a connection. So British colonists planned a grand scale conquest and resettlements. And by resettlement, they're going to do some, we'll talk about it. So on his third voyage for Cook, he's going to bring European plants and animals that are going to have massive ecological consequences. So you're literally replacing somebody else's plants that are perfectly fine, grow perfectly great in their atmosphere and their climate with somebody else, with European ones, because they quote unquote look better or whatever it is. So you have this scientific imperialism where you're wiping out culture and wiping out science and history and all those things because you want to bring in something else. And even with the animals too. So they're going to import sheep to allow for a wool growing economy. That's not where sheep are supposed to be, not in Australia. And the sheep are going to also impact the environment as well. And then in 1788, British are going to colonize Eastern Australia in order to establish a prison colony. They literally colonized the whole country so they could start a prisoner colony, and then sent the prisoners out there and didn't really put the prisoners in jail, just kind of let them out free. So what are the prisoners going to do? And it's mostly male prisoners too. They're going to abuse and victimize a lot of those Aborigine women, and it's just more exploitation and rape and disgusting. So anyway, then next they're going to exploit Australia for timber and flax. So their natural resources are going to be really, really important. So we see deforestation happening. So environmental clashes and abuses that are happening. So that deforestation is going to happen pretty much anywhere Europeans end up. They're going to just go in and wipe out all the trees because they need the trees to build things or need to knock down the things to, anyway, it's just crazy. And so we're going to see Australia is going to be used as a strategic base against the Dutch and French expansion. So Dutch and French are both having locations both in the Americas, and they have some in Southeast Asia as well. And so by them having the largest island, by Great Britain having the largest island in Oceania, it really does stop the progression of Dutch, Netherlands, and France. All right, and so by 1860, less than 100 years later, so they get there around 1770, they're going to be at 1.2 million Anglo-Australians. So these are going to be Europeans who are now living there. So what's happening to the 300,000 Aboriginal people who are there? Most of them are going to be dead. Okay. European ideas and institutions were more influential and disruptive in Oceania than in Afro-Eurasia. So in Afro-Eurasia, they were able to, a lot of the native cultures were able to kind of still maintain or still keep their autonomy or still keep something. With the Aborigines, they weren't able to keep anything. They were just completely wiped out. And even to this day, they still are struggling to find their culture, their history, and all of those things. All right, so we made it to the conclusion. Hopefully that didn't take too long. So new wealth from commerce and state building allowed for global commercial renaissance from the 16th through 18th century. So experiments in religious toleration encourage cultural exchange. Okay, book production and consumption is going to soar because people can read now. We have more printing presses. New monuments are going to arise. We have the Taj Mahal. We have the Shah Abbas mosque, and a lot of other things that are going to pop up, especially in the gunpowder empires. And new luxury goods are going to become widely available. There's more trading happening, and especially trading happening in China or in Asia, that's going to bring these luxury goods into Europe as well as into the Americas, where there's a new large population of Europeans. And Islamic and Chinese worlds retain their own systems, but the Americas and Oceania faced European cultural pressure. So this might be one of the last few chapters that we talk about the Islamic world and Chinese world kind of staying where they are. We're going to see some major changes happening in both of those in the future chapters. All right, so African cultures largely escaped this influence, but still felt impacts of European expansionism due to the slave trade. Because if you're missing 12.7 million people and most of them are men, you're going to feel the impact. Okay, and world more integrated than ever before, but exposure did not obliterate cultural traditions. So we still have our traditions that are still really prevalent and really, really important. And our last one, only Europeans constructed knowledge that they believed was universal and objective. No one else was even trying to enlighten other people because they didn't really see a need to. Chinese didn't see a need to really incorporate outside ideas or those barbaric ideas. But Europeans were quote unquote being universal, even though they were still being incredibly racist and excludatory towards most other populations if you were not white or Christian. Okay. All right, guys. So that is the end of chapter 14. Yeah. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. And yeah, I look forward to you guys. Yeah, I don't know. We'll figure it out. All right. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.